Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece for Reason to Resist on October 10th, 2025. As much of the world's attention has been focused these past few weeks on the momentous events in the Gaza Strip, political and economic conditions in Europe and the United States have continued to deteriorate, I think it's fair to say. On Monday, for example, Sébastien Lecornu resigned as French president after a mere 28 days on the job. Lecornu becomes the third French prime minister to resign in less than 1 year. He did so against a backdrop of ballooning government debt and mass opposition to Emmanuel Macron's austerity regime. Meanwhile, the NATO proxy war in Ukraine has not subsided one iota. On the contrary, judging from Russia's devastating strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure and energy facilities, that war may have only intensified. All along the front lines, Russian troops continue to advance while European leaders and even the Donald himself continue to maintain that NATO and its Ukrainian proxy can actually win this war. In the US, Trump's political fortunes took a turn for the worse with new revelations from Candace Owens. The former Israel supporter and MAGA influencer published texts which revealed that hours before he was murdered, Charlie Kirk told colleagues at TPUSA that he was on the verge of leaving what he described as the pro-Israel cause. Now here to discuss these and other developments with us are two guests, one of whom will be familiar to our audience and one of whom is new to Reason to Resist. John Helmer, a frequent guest on this program, is the longest continuously serving foreign correspondent in Russia and the only Western journalist to direct his own bureau, independent of national or commercial ties. He's born and educated in Australia, studied at Harvard, and has been a professor of political science, sociology, and journalism, and an advisor to governments, including that of Greece and Australia. He's also published several books on military and political topics, his latest being Long Live Novichok, the British Poison Which Fooled the World. Our new guest is Slobodan Despot, who's based in Switzerland. He writes and broadcasts in French through antipresse.net. He formerly served as an advisor to a minister in a cantonal government in Switzerland. Originally from Serbia, Slobodan is an expert on the Balkans and keeps his family home in Belgrade. He also offers expert analysis on French politics, and we wish you both a hearty welcome to Reason to Resist.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you.
So before we begin, I'd just like to remind our audience that if they find this video to be informative, please like and share it. And if you're not already a subscriber, we encourage you to become one. We've grown rapidly and we're aiming for 150,000 subscribers by year end. You can help us by joining our subscriber base. Thank you very much for all your support. So Slobodan, let's begin with you. One possible outcome of Lecornu's resignation in France was that Macron would call new legislative elections. But Lecornu just told the French press that that is unlikely because, according to him, a majority of French parliamentarians do not want new elections. First off, in your view, if legislative elections were held today in France, what do you think the most likely outcome would be?
Well, I will surprise you, but to me, it seems that it doesn't matter at all. France's political life has become a sort of, front row show, while nothing happens actually in the background. Why don't they want to? It would be perfectly, of course, it would be perfectly legit to disband the current Assemblée, the Parliament, and to elect them again. That's what's been done last year, and the outcome was that one party, which is the Rassemblement National, the former Front National, the far right, won basically the election, was one of the two forces winning the election. The other was the far left, and they didn't get anything out of it. No minister, no advantage, no commissions, no committees. So Macron rebuilt a government with the same old gang, so highly unpopular. He picked them among a group of I think 40 or 50 people who are constantly circling around the siege of power in France, so that he completely ignored the outcome of the 24 elections, which of course led to the current situation where nobody in their right mind would take over such a government without a complete, deep and sincere reshuffle of the political scene, which under Macron is not likely to happen. That's why I think it's completely relevant. The only relevant thing would be for Macron to understand his desperate situation and to resign. But this he will not do.
Right. And I imagine that, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, that if he were to choose, it looks like he's on the verge of choosing another person from this cabal of close Macron associates. Any reason to believe that whoever that person's going to be is going to fare better than Lecornu? Is there any realistic prospect of somebody from Macron's political cabal managing to actually maintain a government and implement whatever reforms they feel are necessary?
You know, there is forgive me for being rather more philosophical than political, but there is a very deeply ingrained mentality within the French people, hoping that some providential person will solve the situation. That's the role fulfilled in 1940 by Pétain, who saved the nation by collaborating with the Germans. Then, the Gaulle saved the nation by, reverting and promoting a more sovereign line. Then you had Mitterrand, who was elected in 1981 as a sort of savior. They're constantly expecting some sort of savior and miracle maker. That's quite bizarre, considering that it's the nation that practically invented the modern democracy. And actually, their deep reactions, their reflexes, their political reflexes are monarchical. So, in my view, to answer straight your question, there is no way anybody, as a person, as a political actor, could save the system from crumbling as the system, the Fifth French Republic, that was designed. I mean, it was designed. In a bespoke manner for de Gaulle to be free to do whatever he wanted then. But de Gaulle had actually some personality, and he had, a sort of mystical relationship with his nation, which nobody today could have. So the system itself is completely crippled. It's overaged, and not to talk about the corruption, which is very deep and completely again embedded within the system. Just one example, as you may know, but most people in the world don't know. Former French presidents, the former living French presidents, so currently it's Sarkozy and Hollande, they are alive. They receive a treatment which is completely akin to a royalty. I mean, they have offices, they have chauffeurs, they have state cars, they have personal protection, Secret Service, and they have, of course, pensions and revenues that are, mind-blowing. Each of them costs about I'm forgetting the numbers, but it's between 2 and 3 million of euros every year for just being a retired president. So can you imagine in a country so deeply involved in crisis and debt, such treatment to be conducted over again? And there is no way in the system of France, in the political, in the various political forces, there's nobody, actually trying to change that. They're just all hoping to reach the same advantages. That's it.
It all sounds rather Napoleonic, if you ask me.
Yeah.
So let's turn to you, if I may. Sure, go ahead, John. Please.
A little legal note, since you're a lawyer, Dimitri, you'll appreciate it. It's a question of whether Macron is utterly cynical about ruling under the French Constitution, or whether one would also call it clever. I'm glad Slobodan referred to the sort of Joan of Arc faith that the French have in liberation from a very difficult situation. But Macron has presumably no religious faith, no faith at all except in himself. He can rule under the 16b provision of the Constitution that essentially allows executive power, a dictatorial executive power. And the Article 16b of the Constitution he's been using to rule without a parliamentary vote. He can also use what's known as the Article 49.3 of the Constitution, which basically means that he can force through legislation in Parliament without the level of majority he would need or could get given the current lineup since the 24 election, so long as there's no vote of no confidence. And he can, if you call that cynical or you can call that very clever political plumbing, it's essentially a recipe for executive rule, dictatorial rule, which he can continue till he's finished, which is 2027. And during that period, protect himself from the Sarkozy fate by surrounding himself with legal protections, immunity from subsequent prosecution, and protection from a successor. He has to pick a successor. So these are techniques by which he's ruling. And it seems to me that he's worked out that it doesn't matter, as Slobodan said, what the lineup of Parliament would be. Yes, there has been a suggestion that the French prefects might be ready to organize a nationwide parliamentary election, November 23 to 30. But the reason that they're confident is that it would come back with the same kind of a lineup, and basically Macron doesn't intend to rule with the Assemblée. I mean, he doesn't need it, he thinks, and he's demonstrated that he can do without it. Now, oddly enough, President Putin said last week that he diagnoses the crisis in France as a series of Macron provocations intended to generate what Putin clearly calls a sort of external diversion, create a warfare situation. And there's been several provocations, one of which was a French Secret Service or Special Forces attack on an oil tanker carrying Russian oil off the coast of Saint-Nazaire and Brest. What Putin has said is the French people need to understand they're being fooled, and he's not going to rise to the Macron provocations that would create a kind of war rationale that diverts the country from its own national interest. That's his analysis. I don't know if Slobodan would agree, but what you're basically dealing with is a devil, a political devil who's worked out how to run a country without any public support at all. I mean, somewhere his popularity is around 15%.
Yeah, I do agree, and I would add just a small, a juridical point to this. I think I might be wrong. You'll correct me, John. That the use of Article 16, full powers to the president, is subjected to a eventual confirmation by the parliament. So the parliament should approve it from time to time. I think it's 3 or 6 months. In the current state of affairs, he's quite safe with that, because the parliament just especially his main enemies, the far right, the Rassemblement National of Marine Le Pen. They are supporting him. They are helping him to stay in power. So he's not at risk, basically, but there is a confirmation needed. On the other hand, if he manages to provoke a sort of war, which he's currently doing, and Putin was completely right to explain it through his inner problems. If he manages to provoke a state of war, then there is no limitation at all to his power. Even the Constitution, even Article 16, will be overcome. I think.
That's fascinating, gentlemen. I'd just like to go back to this seizure of an oil tanker, which John referenced. That certainly struck me as a rather provocative act. I understand what happened is that the French military boarded an oil tanker named on a list of Russia's so-called shadow fleet, and they claimed to the French suspect the vessel of being a launch pad for mystery drone flights that forced the closure of airports in Denmark. So, and also 2 crew members apparently who are the ship's captain and the first mate were taken into custody by French authorities. I think one of them might have actually been charged with some criminal offense.
Yes, they're Chinese.
They're Chinese. Okay, so,
yes, and they're charged with the problem the French purportedly raised was that the tanker had changed its flag. It was flying, the registration was Benin, but it had been previously a differently named vessel, and it had a different flag of registration 6 months earlier. So one of the issues was that the Chinese captain failed to disclose clearly which flag he was flying under, and therefore what his legal registration was. And the second charge was the good old-fashioned sort of resisting arrest. He didn't take orders when the French climbed on board. So they took him off and put him in front of a court in Brest. The Chinese government might defend him. I don't know. The Russian position is that it's more than just Macron. The Danes are trying to do it too. And the Danes are rather important. This is a very, I must say, clever tactic. Why? Because these are tankers that are moving through the Danish Straits. They're moving from Russian port, loaded in Russian port, move out into the Baltic Sea and through the Danish Straits into the Atlantic, and then presumably they can go either down to Africa or they can go across the Med through the Suez. What is being done is not bombing them, not hitting them with a drone explosion, which is what the French, and the British and the American secret special forces have been doing to some tankers in the Mediterranean in recent months. What this does is stop them, cause a document check, lead to delays of 2, 3, 4, 5 days. And if any infraction can be found, they take somebody off. Altogether, it slows up the process. It blocks the trade. It adds to the delay, the demurrage, the insurance premiums. It's a very clever way of closing the Danish Straits without closing them militarily. And it puts the Russian side in a position of saying, as Putin said last Thursday, this is piracy. That indeed is what it is. And when Queen Elizabeth I dealt with the Spaniards and the Portuguese, she hired privateers. We'd call them mercenaries now, a sort of Wagnerite types who, for profit, would attack the enemy vessels. The Americans went to war in Libya against the Barbary pirates in the 19th century. Everybody knows what you deal with when you're dealing with pirates, but that would be to raise a level of violence which arguably President Putin has said he's not going to be provoked into doing. In addition, he could escort these tankers with a Russian naval vessel. Altogether, if you raise the escalation to a level of naval force, or even mercenary teams on board that would resist the French, you are entering the realm of provocation. And I agree with Slobodan. It's a very important point that's not being made. That if you get to a violent confrontation, France or Macron can declare there's a war situation and then rule without any limitation at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
just one point, well, actually two, John. Was this vessel in international waters when it was boarded? And secondly, are you aware of a scintilla of evidence that it was being used as a launching pad to send drones?
No. To be honest, I don't know exactly where it was off Saint-Nazaire. But in any event, you could argue that there's an environmental problem, a risk to the French coast, that they have a right to investigate. But this wasn't environmental, and they weren't looking for drones. They ended, or maybe they were, but they didn't find any. What they came up with were trumped up registration and flag-related charges. The purpose is to delay. It's not really to stop or destroy or sink the vessel or confiscate it. That would be impossible legally. Legally, however, they have a right. The Danes have had a right to stop tankers and inspect them. I think the Poles have tried it too. If the Balts were keen, they might try it also. The problem is it's a trumped up legal procedure which works if it causes delay, because that reverberates then through the entire tanker logistics chain, creating delay, uncertainty, raising premium, and making the Russians nervous, and then creating, as Putin said, provocation.
And the drones, John?
I don't believe, no. There's been no evidence that the drones came off a vessel. There is evidence that the Ukrainians used sea drone platforms to fire drone attacks against refinery and energy infrastructure in the St. Petersburg, Leningrad region. The Ukrainians are using the Baltic Sea off Estonia, off Latvia for that purpose, off Poland, with the connivance of the Poles, the Estonians, the Lithuanians, and the Latvians. They're the ones using the sea for offensive. The drone issue is another one of these fabrications, and we could take each one of them separately, but it's not terribly interesting. They are fabrications. So was the Polish drone incident and the so-called MiG-31 entry into Estonian airspace. Each of them's fabricated the closer you look. The point about it is that they're provocations to get Russia into a situation like the ones Slobodan indicated, that Macron wants, cynically wants.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk more broadly about the attitude of the European political elite towards Russia and the Ukraine war. As I indicated at the outset, I suspect you'll agree, all indications are that Ukraine has effectively lost the war. It's not to say it isn't capable of inflicting casualties on Russian forces. It certainly is, but the overall trajectory of the war is decidedly bad for Ukraine. And it seems like the only real questions at this stage are how much territory will Ukraine ultimately lose and whether it will continue to exist at all as a sovereign state. And yet European leaders, not just Macron, of course, seem hell-bent on continuing the funding of this war and even escalating it. And I'm interested in your views as to why. And, of course, the answer may be different from one jurisdiction to another, from one government to another. But perhaps we can start with you, Slobodan. What is your view about this? What is this obsession that the European political elite continues to exhibit with respect to the Ukraine war?
Once again, I shall I cannot answer. I mean, in a straightforward way, because to me it's a mystery, and it is a mystery why they are doing this with their economies that are running towards a complete ruin, with all the signals telling them that there is no way they can turn over the situation. But I've been a witness of, and I mean, I wrote about it and I was involved in that, of the Yugoslav war in the 90s. And nobody noticed, but the Western powers, including the Europeans, and especially, the Americans were, they were in charge. So let's focus on the behavior of the Europeans. They did whatever they could, and they are still doing whatever they can to worsen an already a very tense situation. They headed towards war as much as they could. In just one example, in the spring of 1992, the European Commission managed to have a peace talks about Bosnia, and they were reverted. Those peace talks, they were reverted basically by the Americans, who told the Muslims not to abide by their own signature. And from then on, the Europeans supported, and before this, some European nations like Germany supported the most radical, the most aggressive, and the most warmongering parties in Serbia, in former Yugoslavia, the Croat Ustasha, the Muslim fundamentalists, which were, basically imported into Europe during the Yugoslav war. And we saw a sort of madness course, which was already, obvious at that moment, and that has only gotten worse until now. So now, since the beginning of this crisis with Russia, which has not started in 2022, but in 2014 with the Maidan coup. I'm looking at something that looks to me more and more like a suicide by cop. The cop being Russia. They are suiciding their own political systems, their own economies, their own countries, because they see no future for themselves. They see no future for the nations. And they are in they cannot manage. They cannot handle a situation where the proud European nations who used to rule the world become just a neighborhood of a multipolar or decentralized world today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you have a similar assessment, John, as to what is that, in your view, essentially what is driving this lunacy?
Well, yes, in general, yes. Each country is different, so it's helpful for our audience to understand what we distinguish between the general trends and the individual national ones. A couple of other general points. First of all, one hears a lot of American podcasters describe the European coalition of the willing as a coalition of the stupid, or the coalition of the mad. Sorry, that's not the way politics work, and that's not the way I see it. There are, let's say, extraordinary outcomes of the mistake that the Europeans made in backing the invasion of Libya and the murder of Gaddafi, because that generated the destruction of Libya was driven by the United States and Israel in an attempt to destroy a leading figure of Arab secular nationalism. They got him all right. They murdered him. They destroyed Libya, and they opened the gate to vast streams of refugees coming from Africa through Italy, Malta, and so forth and so on. So a very large part of the southern migration that creates the migration problem in each of these states is the result of their war against the Arabs, which was dictated by being part of the US-Israeli empire. The same you could say about the Afghanistan war, and the same you could say about the Iraq war, and the same you could say about the Syrian war. Each of those released millions of people into a highly lucrative trade for the Turks, for example, but basically a disastrous people's flow into the European states, which have completely unbalanced them and triggered a lot of the so-called far-right ideologies and the loss of traditional values and blah, blah, and the racism. So this general mistake that the European leadership has made for the last generation, compounded by the so-called woke doctrines, and compounded by the rise of the Green movement, especially in Germany, has magnified the adverse or negative effects of the wars the Europeans wanted to inflict on the Arabs, Libya and Syria and Iraq in particular. And that I would understand to be the Europeans knuckling under a US-Israeli imperial doctrine. Each country then takes very different approach. England is different from France. Starmer arrives in power, the Labour Party arrives in power by dint of a massive campaign to demonize Jeremy Corbyn. How was he demonized? As an anti-Semite, regularly, each day in the London Times and all the Murdoch press. The man was demonized and destroyed and driven out of the Labour Party. So you have a man who arrives, a mediocre lawyer, a mediocre public prosecutor, arrives running the Labour Party with a significant majority, but wedded to war along US-Israeli lines. That's how I read English politics. It's a disaster for England. But it's a significant achievement of the Secret Service in England. And I'd say we're looking at the same achievement by the BND in Germany. You mentioned the book, Long Live Novichok. That's an example of the massive success of a propaganda lie about a Russian attack on England using the chemical warfare agent Novichok. The Germans repeated it. The BND and Chancellor Merkel repeated it in the so-called Navalny-Novichok story. Each case has been a massive public success in the sense that everybody in those countries believes the doctrine, believes the ideology, believes that Russia attacked them, even though they're a lie. Now, the same technique was used by the Dutch with the MH17 shoot down. I've tried to document that one too. In each of these cases, I'd argue you've got a massive success of the sort of what do we call it, the deep state in each, the Secret Service, the intelligence agencies, the security agencies, and some corner of the political party they've captured. I'm putting that as a general proposition, and Slobodan, feel free to disagree with it, and Dimitri too. That is how I would see the general success of the propaganda war that has demonized Russia and the Slavs, creating a race base for hating the Russians. Second, we've got racism as part of the anti-migration policies that consume the Netherlands, consume all the European countries, and not only the European countries. So there's a general theme there. There are different ways in which it works, and who are the beneficiaries of this? The general and the particular trends. Well, the military. the deep state bureaucracies, the spy services, the intelligence services, the universities which have been taken over, the think tank community, and the press. You've got a very powerful alliance there that achieves public opinion success against proof that they're lying. They achieve it, and then they hang on to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
By the way, for the record, we refer to them as the Coalition of the Killing here on Research. Before we move on, Slobodan,
yes.
Do you have anything to add to John's observations? I wanted to ask you a related question about this extraordinary militarism we're seeing in Europe. But do you have any further observations to add?
Yes. Generally speaking, I do agree, and it is obvious that the Europeans made a series of tragic mistakes at the time of the crumbling of the USSR. They aligned with the Americans, with the neocon, the Israeli American policies. Not all at the same time. France managed to resist a while, but eventually they got on the line. But those mistakes, those miscalculations and mistakes were made by people who, in my view, as far as I used to know them and to speak with some of them, were quite capable people. They were quite, competent in what they were doing. Politicians were, stemmed from a long political career and a political experience. Ministers would be chosen within a group of diplomatic experts, for instance. But now the successors to these people who did the initial mistakes are deeply incompetent and, I must say, completely stupid people. They are utterly stupid. And, this is not, I'm not saying this as a sort of, a rant. No. I used to be friends, and I was the translator of a great political anthropological thinker of the 20th century, who was Alexander Zinoviev. I think he was the smartest man I ever met. And Zinoviev, who described perfectly the Soviet system, and then went on to describe the Western system, Westernism, when he was expelled from the USSR. He observed that people in the West, in the highly technological society, were losing the ability to think. He wrote a book about that. His last book, he died in 2006 or 2, I don't remember. But his last, or the book before, was named The Factor of Understanding in Russian. I tried to translate it, but as he was a logician, it was very hard for me to do the translation. And he invented his own vocabulary. But basically what Zinoviev said is that from his experience and from his logical views, people in the West, and especially in those, at those levels that required some abstract thinking, were gradually becoming more and more unable to think. They could just react. People who, I think, and here I do agree with John, the thinking people are not in universities, not in political power, they're not in journalism, they are in what they call the deep state, they are in the agencies. That's where thinking people still are. The rest are pawns.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, did Zinoviev express that view during the internet era, or was it prior to the internet era?
He died at the very beginning of the internet era, but he wrote things about the future computerized world, which completely fit with what we are into now. It's amazing the level of prophecy he had reached.
Right. So I'd like to move then to the question of the militarization of Germany in particular. It appears that Chancellor Blackrock, as I like to call him, is hell-bent on turning Germany into the greatest military power west of the Russian border. And one would have thought that this would cause considerable alarm across the continent and the broader world. I haven't seen any indication of a broad-based opposition to the militarization. I'm sure there are opponents within Germany itself, and perhaps there's more opposition than I've come to understand. But what I'm particularly curious to hear from you both on is this: how do you feel that the hyper-militarization of Germany is being perceived by other Europeans, people that are part of the EU but are not from Germany itself? And maybe, John, you could chime in first.
Well, I'd rather Slobodan, because he lives right next to Germany.
Please do. Please.
Well, as you probably know, the Swiss are very, wary of Germans. They although most, most Swiss people speak German, a sort of German language that the Germans themselves do not understand. But they don't like Germany very much. They fought, the Germans, the Austrians, the Habsburgs for centuries, in order to preserve their sovereignty. So they do not like them. And in the Second World War, the defense, the position between Switzerland and Germany was not entirely fake. It was, just a little bit overplayed, but it was real. They didn't want to get on with Hitler. So, and it's not the same form of. It's not an empire. It's a congregation of small republics and cities that do not want to. They don't have ambitions. So, what strikes me here is that the Swiss and the French, by the way, as far as I know, do not even notice that there is a militarization of Germany. It's not a topic. It's not a topic at all. And in my view, they might be right, because the things Chancellor BlackRock is talking about, to me, look completely, abstract and off the scale. To militarize, you need first to have an army or people who would be able to serve in the military. You don't have them in Germany anymore. You have them in Poland, in Croatia. You have them maybe in Romania. I'm not sure, but you don't have the men to man an army. So there is a proposal. I don't know where the point they reached, but there was a proposal to give the nationality, the passport, to migrants if they served in the army. I don't know if it would improve the German military, but it shows that the problem. It shows the problem exists. The manpower problem exists, and the other thing is, to militarize you must rebuild a heavy industry. To rebuild a heavy industry, you must rely on cheap energy, and that's exactly what Germany renounced to. I'm not only talking about the Nord Stream thing. Their non-reaction to the blowing up of Nord Stream, but the closure of nuclear plants. They were very happy to shut down their nuclear plants. So with what energy will they build the heavy industry? And last, of course they might go on buying the weapons that the Americans could promise them and sell them in advance, but they would be unable to build. By the way, Switzerland just bought a fleet of 30 and some F-35s that they will never see. They paid, but they will never see. So the last problem I see with the German militarization, which is is similar to the manpower problem, is an engineering problem. I have a German car. My father used to have German cars. The German cars my father drove were completely to the point. Mine is not. They are over-engineering them. They are much more prone to breaks and failures than any other. Than the Romanian Dacia, than the Yes. I mean, I'm not even talking about Japanese or Korean cars. The German cars now, except for the engines that were engineered 50 years ago, and they went on with them, they are a joke. And now, in the last years, they renounced to their famous and world's best diesel and gas engines, and they turned to electric, where they had to run up against Tesla and the Chinese, who already owned the market, and now they're crumbling. I mean, Porsche is in a turmoil. They're all in a turmoil because, of course, again, to build an industry and to build it quickly, you need smart, quick-thinking people who are free to do what they have to do. But this is not the case in Germany today.
Mm-hmm. And John, let's focus on the Russian perspective on this for a moment. No one, obviously, we all know that.
I'm not a BMW driver, by the way. I'm not a BMW driver, and I drive a car that was built in Japan in 1991, whereas a BMW continually recalls, for serious faults, virtually every model it's made for the last 15 years, and it's even affecting its share price. That's what I understand.
Yeah, that's exactly. I am a BMW driver, and when I had to change the battery for the first time, well, first I noticed I saw that I could not do it by myself. I had to call in a mechanic, and it cost me the price, almost the price of a used car somewhere in the Balkans. So I understood it. It was over.
Yes.
All of this sounds like an argument for Chinese electric vehicles, but what do I know? But to go back to my question, John, obviously no country suffered as much at the hands of the Nazis as the Soviet Union. So one would expect quite natural for the Russian people and their government to be thoroughly alarmed by this development. But do you think that they are more or less taking the perspective that Slobodan has articulated, that however much they may wish to be a superpower, those days are gone, and as a practical matter, that is not within the capacity of the German state to achieve?
I don't think that any Russian, either person, family that has a relative in the Immortal Regiment, the victims of German invasion, and I have a relative in the Immortal Regiment, no one, not at the public level, not at the leadership level, takes Germany unseriously. There are several things that motivate this, and not simply the remembrance of the history. The Russian perception is that, notwithstanding all of the internal domestic troubles that Germany's brought on itself, the German influence has been extremely penetrating and destructive in the Balkans.
Yeah.
Since, with the aim of destroying Yugoslavia. Second, it can be seen in Poland. There's a significant division inside Polish politics over the pro-German and the anti-German factions, if you like. The current foreign minister, Radek Sikorski, is considered in Warsaw politics to be Germany's man. And this has lots of implications for a Russian point of view. A German-Polish combination begins to look geographically and strategically very like the lineup, if you add in the Ukrainian battlefield, of the pre-1941 invasion period. So nobody takes the German militarization unseriously, I agree. The readiness of Chancellor Merz to militarize is accompanied by massive repression in Germany. I recently published a book in German on the Navalny-Novichok complex. That's its name in English. Its name in German is an exact translation. And it's an account of how Merkel and the intelligence service, the BND, inflicted on the German people this massive lie about Navalny's Novichok. But the book can't be distributed in Germany. There's no bookshop that will dare sell it. Bookshops or centers for, let's call it, independent thinking are constantly subject to harassment. So-called private complainants file complaints with a city prosecutor. The prosecutor then goes after the institution or the individual for trumped-up charges. The level of fear in Germany, I have to say, is really quite extraordinary. And that means that notwithstanding all the irrationalities that Slobodan has mentioned, and I entirely agree, and I'm glad you've mentioned them, Merz can rule by repression. Merz has won an election with something less than 28% mandate, with some rigging of the election so that the left party didn't get in, didn't beat the 5% threshold, and the ADP is being under constant pressure, including litigation, threats of jail, police inspections at 6 in the morning. The level of repression in Germany is probably greater if you're white than anywhere else in Europe. If you're not white, France and England are probably feeling the same level of repression, police repression. And when you get an atmosphere and a system dedicated to repression, you can achieve all sorts of things for the let's say the temporary time the current power holders stay in power.
Yes, I would like to add just one word to this. Of course, there are several levels. The material level of the question of German militarization is, well, may sound laughable. It is, but symbolically speaking, when they talk about remilitarizing, and with the spirit of revanche that animates them, then you see that there's something else that is at play. If they had the means, if they had the atomic bomb, you feel that they would use it at this point now. So of course, well, you talked about the influence, and I mean the evil influence they exerted. During the Yugoslav wars, the BND run by Klaus Kinkel was I think the most destructive force in all of Europe, although there was no German weaponry involved. So this also is part of German remilitarization, which started already in the 1980s. I think it's not the last whim of Mr. BlackRock, because he's hugely unpopular, and he, like Macron, would like to invent some sort of state of emergency to consolidate his power.
Let's turn to the United States in closing, and two questions I'd like to ask you both. The first relates to, I mean, from my perspective, Donald Trump was never serious about bringing an end to the Ukraine war, and we don't need to get into that discussion. I've had plenty to say about that, including my conversations with John. But I think it's now abundantly clear that, particularly with these claims that he's made recently, that Ukraine can actually win this thing. The peace process, if ever it was alive between Russia and the United States, it's essentially dead at this stage. Perhaps it'll be revived at some point in the future. And it was in that context that, and also Trump referred to the Russian military as a paper tiger. Extraordinary statement. And it was in that context that Vladimir Putin gave a speech or made comments at the Valdai Club, the recently concluded Valdai conference, about U.S.-Russia relations. And John, you've written an article which suggested quite pointedly that there are people within the Russian political elite who aren't especially happy with the conciliatory language that Vladimir Putin employed when he commented upon U.S.-Russia relations and Donald Trump's regime. Are there, from your perspective, real tensions within the Russian political elite about this conciliatory approach that Vladimir Putin has taken? Or do you think there's essentially a consensus within the Russian political elite that this is the correct course of action?
It's a complicated answer. How can I put it? Russian decision-making is remarkably democratic by comparison with Germany, England, and France. There are factions that are powerful that influence and attempt to lobby particular business, particular economic structures, particular beneficial arrangements on the domestic economy side. They are lobbying against the central bank's interest rate policy. 17 to 18% central bank interest crushes the economy in lots of ways. You have a transition underway between the old oligarch system created during the Yeltsin period, supporting the President Putin's taking of power, and subsequently wiped out by or severely damaged by the US-European sanctions program, and been forced to repatriate if they can, return home if they must, and then ultimately they're being replaced by a new generation of people that that don't share the old oligarchy's interest in exporting capital, even if they could, and they can't. So there are these strains and arguments. There are also very serious arguments. There have been from the beginning about the military mistakes that were made at the beginning of the special military operation. Russia has a unique military in the speed at which it learns from its mistakes. And the learning from the mistakes continues to be a process. President Putin himself, since he made his Valdai remarks on Thursday, is the principal source of evidence that he himself believes he's made mistakes of excessive conciliation, flattery, appeasement. He hasn't used those words, but he has undertaken to explain himself facing internal criticism. Now, in a state of war, which we're in, I'm not going to say things that I know from my sources about internal arguments within the Russian government that give aid and comfort to the enemy. I'm not going to do that. I even suspended the 30-odd years of coverage of the Russian oligarchs once they went on the sanctions list, because I will not give aid and comfort to the enemy in a state of war. And it's a serious war, and it's far from over. What I can say is that Putin, since Thursday's remarks at Valdai, has called two important collective meetings. First, the Security Council meeting and this week, and then followed by a highly unusual meeting with the General Staff, the Defense Minister, and the commanders on the front, the commanders of the group armies. And he made it very clear that decision-making for the prosecution of the Ukraine war is a collective consensus. He made the same, it's more than a gesture, it's a process. And that's why I'd call it, roughly speaking, democratic. Before the beginning of the Istanbul round of negotiations with the Ukrainians, President Putin called in both military and civilian officials and advisors to make a collective decision about what the terms would be that the Russian side presented during the first two meetings in Istanbul. Though the Russian delegation was led by presidential representative Vladimir Medinsky, the consensus forming came from defense, from the intelligence service and the foreign ministry. And that's the way things are running. Now, I would say, in quick answer to your question, Dimitri, that there is a consensus about how to prosecute the Ukraine war to the end of the war against Ukraine and the destruction of the threat to Russian security. At the same time, there's a consensus, and I don't want to get into too many of the details, that there are very much bigger and more pervasive threats from the United States. For example, President Trump's decision to accelerate the deployment in outer space of the so-called Golden Dome. This is a deeply destabilizing initiative, whether it works or not, that's aimed at protecting the US from the strategic capacity of the Russian side or the Chinese side to maintain a mutual assured destruction doctrine, which has kept us from nuclear war until now. The strategic stakes in preserving some modus vivendi with Trump are very high, and Putin is correct, and there's a consensus behind his being conciliatory to that extent. Second, there's a consensus that there's, as Slobodan has mentioned, as we've mentioned before, each of the European states wants to militarize at the Russian border. The Poles, the Germans, the Norwegians, the Swedes, the Finns, right across the top, the Arctic Circle to the Far East and through the Balkans. We haven't gotten to the way in which the Americans are accelerating sanctions in Serbia, cut off their oil supply. The Balkans, the Caucasus, the Caspian Sea, and the Iran border. These are all war fronts. Now, let's put it this way. There has to be a Russian consensus that the Russian government and the Russian people can't fight all those wars at the same time. Even the Americans and Trump's people have come to the view that they should pursue a policy of sequencing of wars, maximizing their power, where they think they can win, because winning or not losing is an essential part of Trump's program. So there has to be a consensus on the Russian side to concentrate on one battlefield at a time. Now, today we're talking on Friday morning, Moscow time, European time, Athens time, and this afternoon the Norwegians are probably going to announce that Donald Trump has won the Nobel Peace Prize, because the pressure on that Nobel Peace Prize committee would be unbearable since yesterday's announcement of the so-called peace in Gaza. Now, we are having to then talk with an audience that will already know how the Peace Prize drama played out. When the dust settles, either as a halo around Trump's head or some alternative, the fact of the matter is that there must be a Russian consensus, and there is a Russian consensus around Putin's management of the battlefield, which goes slowly. Why does it go slowly? Because Russian people want it that way. The price that Russia has already paid in blood is very significant. And the kind of accelerate to finish them off doctrine, it may make a certain kind of military sense. It doesn't end the war in the Ukraine, and it costs Russian lives, which Putin, as a very careful politician, careful of his own people, won't contemplate. I've gone on a bit too long, but perhaps that answers your question.
I would like to conclude with one other question related to the United States, and this is this question is for Slobodan, and that is, I talked at the outset of this program about the Charlie Kirk assassination and recent revelations when he was first in the immediate aftermath of his killing. The U.S. government, the Trump regime, came out with guns a-blazing, saying that this was Antifa, it was a left-wing assassin, somehow related with the trans movement. And there has been an avalanche of skepticism over time directed at the official narrative and increasing questions about whether Israel had a motive to kill him. And I'm not suggesting that there's direct evidence of Israel's involvement. I'm not aware of any direct evidence. But the fact that Netanyahu has come out twice and denied that Israel was behind this killing, I think is testimony to how much suspicion there is out there. And this latest revelation, clearly, I think it is now indisputable that in the final weeks of his life, Charlie Kirk was raising serious questions about U.S. support for Israel. And even as those text messages that Candace Owens just revealed show, expressing a doubt whether he could continue to support the cause at all. And so my question to you, Slobodan, is we hear very little about how this is all being perceived in Europe. And I'd be most curious to know what, if anything, people in Switzerland are saying about this. Is this of something that's not even on their radar? Are they looking at it with sort of a detached bemusement? Or are people, Europeans, as far as you can tell, troubled by all of this? And if so, how?
Well, first of all, when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, I was not in Switzerland, I was in Serbia. And in Serbia, the reaction was tremendous. Well, because he was known among the Serbs, he used to play in a basketball team, the White Eagles in Chicago, I think. They called him Kirkovic, and so he was a friend of the community for I suppose for family reasons or neighborhood reasons. So they knew him well, and Serbia was the country in the world with the highest support for Trump at the moment of his election. You had a 60 and some % of Serbs favoring Trump. When in the Western Europe, he was down to 12 or 15 or 20% or something like that. The next most favorable country to Trump in Europe at the time of the elections was Switzerland, but much lower. I mean, it was about 30 or 35%. So. In the West of Europe, first of all, you have a sort of feeling of horror, fear, or fascination when they are on the conservative side. Fascination, but fearful fascination with the whole MAGA thing in America. They, as much as the Europeans are worried by the problems of migration, security, safety, state burden, state inefficiency, as much they cannot approve or abide by the American solutions and the American rhetorics about this. So they feel rather, because if you go into the minutiae, as we did into the minutiae that we're not going to expose here again of the Kirk assassination, you see, of course, that there is something very, very nasty behind, and that there is a sort of, setup. The first sign of this. At the very moment it happened was the immediate spread of all sorts of lunatic explanations and theories about the killing. I've listened, as you did, to all sorts of serious people in ballistics and other experts who said, well, there's no way it was done like that. And the fact that the Trump administration, with Mr. Kash Patel at the head of FBI, who promised to drain the swamp and clear the mess, they going on with the cover-ups just like the predecessors did, while having a Kennedy in their administration, which is really, the most the biggest irony of it all. Even to me, it's something that's it's over the top. You can't handle it anymore. You know that the old inner disputes, bloody disputes of the American mafia are going on, and we cannot fathom anything about that. It's their business. And about Israel, I share the views of this French analyst whom you certainly know, Emmanuel Todd, who wrote a remarkable book on the defeat of the West last year. He's been very, very much attacked for that. And he says that there is no way the tail is wagging the dog. Israel is the rabid dog used by America to justify things that Americans could not do on their own. So when we say Israel involved in something happening in America, I would say that what we call the deep state, which is basically an American thing, might outsource some of its operations to somebody abroad who is skilled, or who is bold enough to do them, or who can escape more easily. But the whole, in my gut feeling, I cannot prove it, but in the whole Charlie Kirk assassination and the dispute surrounding it, to me, is a matter of internal American deep state or internal mafia, because it's run by a mafia, affairs. I read a book that was excessively, shocking to me. It was the book by Carol Quigley. You certainly know his big memoirs, Hope and I don't remember now. It was memoirs about how America was ruled by an American historian who was, by the way, the mentor of Bill Clinton, and he explained that there were families, interests, clans ruling America, supporting both parties at the same time, and what was obvious is that they settled their core problems in a mafia way, which means bloody. And this, to me, looks like one of these, these moments. These moments are repeating in such a predictable way. You had Lincoln, you had of course Kennedy, you had Martin Luther King, you had Bobby Kennedy, you had, and everything is shrouded in mystery. No assassination. The assassinations in Europe. There was a French pacifist, Jean Jaurès. Who killed him, why, and how was completely obvious. Killings in Europe are usually completely, obvious. The manner, the reasons, and the person. In America, the Oklahoma thing, there is no way that guy, Tim McVeigh, could have done it by himself. Everyone knows it. So it's too deep. For me, it's too deep to dive into that mud.
Yeah. Interestingly, Emmanuel Todd, you may have seen it, just published an article on Substack in which he commented. It was largely about an update on the rapid decline of the West, but he touched upon the relationship between the United States and Israel. You may have seen that. I actually quoted that on X because I've been arguing vociferously that Israel is a U.S. military base masquerading as a country. Yeah. And that's what it's been from the time of its founding. And I totally agree, Slobodan. If Israel had a hand in it, that means that the U.S. deep state had a hand in it.
Yeah, that's it. That's
it. Absolutely. So, look, I really appreciate the time you've taken, and I hope we can do this again. There's so much more we could talk about. But I'm gonna end it there because I have another report to do. But thank you very much, and let us hope that the Donald doesn't win the Nobel Peace Prize. But I wouldn't be surprised.
It doesn't matter.
Exactly. It'll put an end to any mythology surrounding the Nobel Peace Prize.
No.
Anyways, we're signing off now from Reason to Resist, and we look forward to our next discussion. Thank you.
Looking forward. Thank you very much, Dimitri.
Thank you very much.
Bye.